The night he threw her away and built his own destruction. If you've ever been thrown away by someone who swore they'd love you forever, if you've ever stood in the wreckage of a life you built with both hands and wondered how a single sentence could burn 10 years to the ground, then stay with me tonight. Because this story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when a woman stops begging, stops crying, and starts thinking. Before we begin, do me a favor. Hit that like button and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments, so I can see how far this story travels tonight. Now sit back. Let me tell you about the night Adrian Vale made the biggest mistake of his life. The rain over Crestmont started around 9 that Thursday, and by 10 it was the kind of rain that made the city look like it was trying to wash itself clean of something. Vanessa Hale stood at the kitchen island of the penthouse she had picked out herself 6 years ago, back when Adrian still asked her opinion on things. She was slicing a lemon into thin, careful discs for the tea he liked before bed. Chamomile with honey, a habit left over from when he used to get migraines in grad school, and she'd sit with him in the dark until they passed. Her hands moved on autopilot. Her mind was somewhere else, turning over the small, strange things she'd been collecting for weeks without letting herself name them. The smell of perfume on his coat collar that wasn't hers. The way he'd started locking his phone face down on the nightstand, something he'd never done in 10 years of marriage. The 2 extra charges on the black card last month, one at a jewelry store on Marsden Avenue, the other at a baby boutique in the Arts District. She'd told herself the jewelry was for her birthday. She couldn't come up with a story for the baby boutique, so she'd stopped looking. A woman learns to stop looking when looking starts to hurt. The front door opened. She heard his keys hit the bowl in the foyer, the hand-thrown ceramic one she'd bought at that little market in Lisbon on their 5th anniversary. Funny, the things a person notices right before their life cracks open. Vanessa. He came into the kitchen still in his coat, rain on his shoulders, and she knew before he said another word. She didn't know what he was going to say. She just knew the weather in his face. He'd always had a tell. A certain flatness in his eyes when he was about to deliver bad news to a boardroom. The analysts at Vale Dynamics called it the freezer. She'd thought stupidly that it was a look he reserved for other people. "You're home early," she said, because it was the easier sentence. "We need to talk." 4 words. The oldest 4 words in the English language, when one person has already left the marriage and the other hasn't been told yet. She set the knife down on the cutting board. The lemon she'd been slicing was crooked now, the last disc twice as thick as the others. A small, sloppy thing. She'd remember that lemon for the rest of her life. "Okay," she said. Adrian didn't sit. That was the first thing that told her this wasn't an argument. It was an announcement. He stayed on his feet across the island from her, hands braced on the marble, and he looked at her the way a man looks at a spreadsheet he's already decided to close. "I want a divorce." There are moments in a person's life that don't move at normal speed. Vanessa would try later to remember exactly how long the silence was after that sentence. It felt like a full minute. It was probably less than 3 seconds. She heard the rain, and she heard the refrigerator hum, and she heard her own pulse in her ears like something underwater. "What did you just say?" It wasn't a question. She'd heard him perfectly. "I want a divorce," he repeated, because Adrian Vale repeated things when he wanted them to feel final. "I've been thinking about it for a while. I should have said something sooner, I know that." "A while," she said. "Yes." "How long is a while, Adrian?" He exhaled through his nose, impatient, like she was being difficult. "Vanessa, I'm not going to stand here and litigate a timeline with you." "You're not going to—" She laughed once, a small shocked sound that didn't belong in her own kitchen. "You're not going to litigate a timeline, okay? Okay. That's how we're talking tonight." "I didn't come home to fight." "No," she said. "You came home to end my life. I can see the difference." He had the decency, at least, to look down at the marble when she said that, but only for a second. Then the freezer was back. "There's someone else." He said it like he was finally putting down a bag he'd been carrying a long way, like he was the one being relieved. Vanessa felt something cold slide down the back of her throat and settle in her stomach, and underneath the cold there was a heat starting, a slow, low burn she'd never felt before in her life. "Who?" "Does it matter?" "Adrian." "Who?" He looked at her. "CL." For one absurd second, the name didn't land. And then it did. Ciel Marsh, 26 years old, junior strategist at Veil Dynamics. Vanessa had met her twice, once at the Summer Donor Gala, once in the lobby of the Aspen building when Vanessa had dropped off the lunch Adrian had forgotten. A pretty girl with very still eyes and a handshake that lasted a half-second too long. Vanessa had noticed the handshake at the time and then decided she was being paranoid, because a decent wife doesn't think that way about every woman her husband works with. A decent wife? She almost laughed again. Ciel, Vanessa said. Her voice had gone strange and level. The girl from the Aspen floor, the one who brought you coffee the day of the merger vote, that's Ciel. Vanessa. How long? It doesn't... Adrian. She put her hands flat on the marble so they would stop shaking. I have given you 10 years of my life. I have earned the answer to this question. How long? A muscle in his jaw. 14 months. 14 months. She did the math before she could stop herself. 14 months ago was the Maui trip. They had renewed their vows on the beach at sunset because she'd been feeling, she remembered with a kind of sick clarity now, that something had been off between them and she'd wanted to fix it. She had stood barefoot in the sand and told this man she would love him for the rest of her life, and he had already been sleeping with someone else for 2 months by then. You renewed our vows, she said quietly, while you were... I know how it sounds. Do you? Vanessa, I didn't plan this. It happened. I tried to end it more than once. I couldn't. You couldn't. She's pregnant. And there it was. The real reason he was standing in her kitchen at 10 at night in a wet coat. Not love, not conscience, a deadline. Vanessa heard the sentence, and then she heard it again inside her own head, and for a second she was somewhere else entirely. She was 28 years old, sitting in an exam room at Cedar Park Fertility, holding Adrian's hand while a doctor used the kindest possible voice to tell them that the odds weren't good. She was 31, crying on a bathroom floor over a test that had 2 lines for 45 seconds, and then, somehow, only 1. She was 33, agreeing, through tears, to stop trying, because Adrian had said, she remembered the exact words, "It's you and me, Van. It was always going to be you and me. I don't need a kid. I need you." She was 36 now, and the man who didn't need a kid had gotten one with a 26-year-old strategist in 14 months. How far along, she heard herself say. 5 months. 5 months. So he'd known. He had known, and he had come home, and he had kissed her forehead in the mornings, and he had let her make him chamomile tea, and he had slept in their bed for 5 months, knowing. Get out. Vanessa, let me... Get out of my house, Adrian. He didn't move. He did something worse. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out an envelope. Thick, cream-colored, the kind his lawyers used, and set it on the marble between them with the same calm, proprietary motion he used to slide contracts across a conference table. I had Harlan draw something up, he said. It's generous. More than generous. You'd be comfortable for life. I'm not trying to fight you, Van. I want you taken care of. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. Taken care of, she repeated. Yes. Like a dog, she said. Like a dog you're rehoming. Don't be dramatic. And something in her, some last small polite thing that had survived the last 10 minutes, quietly died. Dramatic. Her voice was very soft now. People who knew her in later years would learn to be afraid of that softness. Adrian, you came into my home. You told me you've been sleeping with a child for over a year. You told me she's pregnant. You put an envelope on my counter like I'm a severance package, and you're telling me not to be dramatic. I'm telling you to be smart. You're a smart woman, Van. That's always been... Don't. That's always been the thing about you. Don't. You understand how the world works. This is cleaner for both of us. Cleaner for you. For both of us. She stared at him. She actually stared at him, like she was seeing him for the first time, and maybe she was. Because here was the thing she had not understood until this moment, standing in the kitchen of a penthouse she had decorated on weekends while he worked. Adrian Veil did not think he was doing something cruel. He thought he was doing something efficient. He thought he was being a good man about it, because he had brought the envelope, because the number inside was large, because he delivered the news in person instead of through a lawyer. In his head, right now, he was the adult in the room. That was the part that broke her. Not the affair, not the baby. The fact that he genuinely believed he was handling it well. Get out, she said again. Get out of my house, Adrian, before I do something one of us regrets. Vanessa. Out. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his keys from the counter. Not the bowl, the counter. He'd never even made it back to the bowl. And he walked to the door of the kitchen, and he stopped, and he did the thing that she would replay in quiet rooms for years. He turned back, and he said, with what she realized later was genuine tenderness. I did love you, Van, for what it's worth. I want you to know that. And then he left. She stood in the kitchen for a long time after the front door closed. The lemon discs were drying out on the cutting board. The kettle had stopped whistling at some point. She didn't remember it whistling. The envelope sat on the marble like a small white animal that had wandered in out of the rain. She didn't cry. That was the part, later, that unsettled her most. She would have expected herself to crumble. She had always been the kind of woman who cried at dog commercials. Instead, she just stood there, very still, and she watched her own hands on the marble and noticed, with a strange clinical interest, that they weren't shaking anymore. Somewhere under the shock, something else was already waking up. It was not grief. Grief would come later, in the car, in the shower, in the middle of aisle 6 at a grocery store she didn't normally go to. It was not rage either. Not yet. Rage is loud. This was not loud. This was the other thing. The thing that lives under the rage, in certain kinds of women, and only wakes up once in a lifetime. She picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. She walked to the fireplace in the living room, the one they'd only ever used for show, and she turned the gas on, and she lit it, and she laid the envelope on the flames. The paper curled. The wax seal bubbled and ran. Harlan Whitcross, Esquire, his name on the return address, blackened and then disappeared. No thank you, she said to no one. Her voice sounded to her own ears like someone she was about to become. Then she went upstairs and packed a bag. She didn't go to a hotel. A hotel was what he would expect. She drove instead to her sister Priya's house in Linden Heights, a 40-minute drive in weather that had gotten worse, and she sat in the driveway for almost 10 minutes before she could make herself get out. The porch light came on when she finally did. Priya opened the door in sweats and a face mask and took one look at her and said, "Oh, Van! Oh, honey, what did he do?" "He wants a divorce," Vanessa said. Her voice was steady. "She's pregnant." Priya closed her eyes for a second. Then she opened them and stepped aside. "Get in here." They didn't talk at first. Priya made tea, not chamomile. Chamomile was poisoned now. Black tea, strong, with too much sugar. And Vanessa sat at the kitchen table in her sister's house and held the mug with both hands and didn't drink it. The house smelled like the cinnamon candles Priya burned year-round. Somewhere upstairs, Priya's husband was pretending to be asleep so his sister-in-law could fall apart in peace. "Say it," Priya said eventually. "Say what?" "Whatever you're not saying." Vanessa stared at this tea. "He brought an envelope." "An envelope?" "A settlement. He had his lawyer draw it up. He put it on the counter, Priya. He put it on the counter like he was—" She stopped. She didn't have the word. "Like he was tipping me." "That pig," Priya said, very quietly, and there was a tremor in her voice that Vanessa hadn't heard in years. "That absolute— Van, I'm going to kill him." "No, you're not." "I am." "No." Vanessa set the mug down, very precisely, on the coaster. "You're not. Because if anyone kills him, it's going to be me. And I'm not going to use a knife." Priya looked at her, really looked. And whatever she saw in her sister's face at that moment was enough to make her sit back a little in her chair. "Van," she said carefully, "what are you thinking?" "I don't know yet." "That's not a no." "No, it's not." They sat there. The rain kept coming down. At some point, Priya reached across the table and took her sister's hand, and Vanessa let her, and it was only then, only with another person's skin against hers, that the first tear finally came. It was a small, ugly, private thing, and she hated it. But it came, and then another one, and then Priya was up and around the table and holding her, and Vanessa was crying in a way she hadn't cried since she was 9 years old and their mother had died, crying like something was being pulled out of her by the roots. She cried for the girl she had been at 24 when she'd met him. She cried for the bathroom floor and the single line. She cried for the beach in Maui. She cried for the lemon she'd been slicing when he walked in. And then eventually she stopped. It took almost an hour, but she stopped. And when she straightened up in her sister's arms, her face was wet and her eyes were swollen and her voice when it came was absolutely clear. "Priya," she said, "I need your laptop." "Van, it's 2 in the morning." "I know." "What do you need a laptop for at 2 in the morning?" Vanessa wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I need to look at law schools." Priya stared at her. "Law schools," Priya repeated. "Yes." "Vanessa Marie Hale, you just had the worst night of your life. Do not tell me that your response to this is to apply to law school." "Not tonight," Vanessa said. "Tonight I'm just going to look." And Priya, who had known her sister for 36 years and who understood suddenly that something in her had shifted tonight that was not going to shift back, got up and got the laptop. The next morning, Adrian woke in the guest suite at the Carrington Hotel on 6th because he had, despite his speech about being an adult about this, not actually wanted to go home to Ciel yet. He ordered coffee. He read 3 news alerts about Veil Dynamics on his phone. He checked his messages. There was nothing from Vanessa. He frowned at the screen. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Texts, calls, a voicemail, maybe. The kind women left that you had to delete halfway through. He'd been braced for it the whole drive to the hotel. He'd even rehearsed a few calm, reasonable replies. Instead, silence. He told himself this was good. This was her being smart, the way he'd asked her to be. This was the efficient outcome. He did not realize, because Adrian Veil had never in his life known how to read silence, that the silence was the sound of something enormous moving, very quietly, under the surface of his life. By the end of the week, Vanessa had done 3 things. She had contacted a divorce attorney, not Adrian's lawyer Harlan, and not anyone in Harlan's circle, but a woman named Delphine Okafor, who practiced out of a small firm in Rosewood and who had, 10 years earlier, buried a hedge fund manager so thoroughly in discovery that he had settled at 80 cents on the dollar just to make her stop. Delphine had listened to Vanessa for 40 minutes without taking a note. Then she had said, "I want you to understand something, Mrs. Hale. You don't need me to be angry for you. You're going to be angry enough for both of us. You need me to be patient. Can you be patient?" "Yes," Vanessa said. "How patient?" "As patient as I need to be." Delphine had smiled then, a small, private, dangerous smile. Good. The second thing, she had opened an account in her own name at a bank Adrian didn't use. She had transferred into it exactly the amount of her own pre-marriage savings, adjusted for inflation. Not a cent more, not a cent less. She did not want his money. She wanted her own. The third thing, she had taken the LSAT practice test she'd downloaded at 2 in the morning on her sister's laptop, and she had scored a 168 cold on 3 hours of sleep in her sister's kitchen in sweatpants. She had stared at the score for a long time. Then she had closed the laptop and gone for a walk. It was the first clear morning after the rain. The light over Linden Heights was that specific pale gold you only get in Cressmont in October. She walked for almost 2 hours, and she thought about nothing, and she thought about everything, and by the time she got back to Priya's porch, she knew 3 things about herself that she had not known the week before. 1, she was not going to die from this. 2, the woman who had stood in that kitchen slicing lemons, the woman who had been a good wife, a patient wife, a grateful wife, that woman was not coming back. Not because she was bitter, because she was done. 3, Adrian had made a mistake. Not the affair, not the pregnancy. Those were small, ordinary human mistakes that small, ordinary human men made every day. His mistake was older than that and more specific, and he didn't know he'd made it yet. His mistake was this. He had believed for 10 years that she was soft because she was kind. He had confused the two. A lot of men did. 2 weeks later, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, Vanessa sat in a coffee shop on Ashland called Verity's, waiting on a woman from admissions at Blackwood Law she'd cold emailed 3 days earlier. The woman was late. Vanessa didn't mind. She had her notebook open and a cup of black coffee going cold in front of her, and she was making a list, not a vengeance list, a plan. She She was on item number 7 when she became aware, the way a person becomes aware of weather changing, that someone was watching her. She didn't look up right away. She finished the sentence she was writing. Then she lifted her eyes, very casually, to the mirror behind the espresso machine across the room. There was a man at the corner table by the window, dark coat, dark hair going silver at the temples. He was not pretending to read. He wasn't pretending anything. He was looking at her directly, without apology, with an expression she couldn't immediately name. It was not the look men usually gave her. It was not interest. It was not hunger. It was something more careful than that. It was the look of a man studying a chess problem he hadn't expected to find in a coffee shop. Their eyes met in the mirror. He didn't look away. He didn't smile. He just held her gaze for one long, unhurried second, and then, very slightly, he inclined his head. Not a greeting, an acknowledgement, the kind of nod one professional gives another across a crowded room to say, "I see you." Then he went back to his cup. Vanessa looked down at her notebook. Her pen had stopped moving. Her heart, absurdly, was doing something strange and fast under her collarbone. She did not know who the man was. She did not know she would know, one day, every scar on his hands and the name of the grandmother who had raised him, and the reason he drank his coffee black and hot enough to burn. She did not know that years from now, when a reporter asked her, carefully, because people asked Vanessa Hale things carefully by then, when she had first known that her life was going to change, she would not say the night Adrian told me. She would say the afternoon at Verity's. But that was years away. Right now, she was just a woman with a cooling cup of coffee and a list in a notebook. And across the room, a stranger in a dark coat had noticed her. And she had, for the first time in a long time, noticed herself being noticed. Not as Adrian Vale's wife, not as Adrian Vale's ex-wife, not as a statistic, but as a person still in motion. She turned the page of her notebook. At the top, in small, clean handwriting, she wrote, Item 8, never be the one they underestimate again. Outside, a slow autumn rain had started again on Ashland Street. She watched it come down and she thought, with a calm that surprised her, all right, let's begin. The woman from admissions at Blackwood Law showed up 42 minutes late, out of breath, apologizing about a train, and Vanessa gave her the kind of smile that costs nothing and means nothing. And they talked for an hour about application timelines and recommendation letters and personal statements. The woman was nice, young, a little flustered. She kept calling Vanessa ma'am and then correcting herself to Ms. Hale, and at one point she said, "Can I ask, are you sure about this? A lot of people your age, they think about law school, but the hours, the toll it takes," and she trailed off because Vanessa had stopped smiling in a way that made the rest of the sentence feel impolite. "I'm sure," Vanessa said. "Okay." The woman nodded once. "Okay. Then I'll send you the early decision packet tonight." When the woman left, Vanessa sat for another 10 minutes with her cold coffee. She didn't look at the corner table. She didn't need to. She could feel, the way you feel sun on the side of your face, that the man in the dark coat was gone. He had left some time in the last half hour, quietly, without a scrape of a chair. She hadn't seen him go. She gathered her notebook and her coat and paid for her coffee and walked out into the rain, and it wasn't until she was unlocking her car that she noticed the folded piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. She stood in the rain looking at it for a long second. Then she pulled it free. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock, folded once, and on the outside it said, in a slanted economical handwriting she didn't recognize, only her last name, Hale. She opened it in the car with the door closed and the heater coming on. Inside, the same hand had written 2 lines. "You dropped this at the front counter. Thought you'd want it back." Beneath that, an address. A building on Faro Street she didn't know, no name, no signature. And clipped to the bottom of the cardstock by a small brass paperclip was a photograph. It took her a moment to place it. When she did, her hands went cold. The photograph was of her husband, her estranged husband now. She kept forgetting the tense, standing on the sidewalk outside a restaurant she didn't recognize, with his arm around the waist of a young woman in a pale blue coat. The woman was laughing. Adrian was laughing. The woman was unmistakably pregnant. The coat was unbuttoned, and the swell of her belly was visible under a cream sweater. The photograph was date-stamped in the corner in small digital numerals. The date was 9 months ago, not 14. 9, which meant either Adrian had lied about when the affair started, Or CL Marsh had been pregnant a lot earlier than anyone had been told. Vanessa stared at the photograph for a long time. The rain beat against the roof of the car. Somewhere inside her chest, a small, precise door opened, and a small, precise thought walked through it. Someone is helping me. She didn't know who. She didn't know why. She should have been frightened. A sensible woman, sitting alone in a parked car in the rain with a photograph on her lap, that someone had put there without her knowing, should have been frightened. Instead, Vanessa Hale, who had cried herself to sleep at her sister's kitchen table 2 weeks earlier, folded the cardstock back up and slid the photograph carefully into the inside pocket of her bag, and started the car. And the thing she felt, for the first time since Adrian had walked into her kitchen in a wet coat, was something very close to a smile. She did not drive to the address on Faro Street. Not yet. She drove home, to Priya's, which was home now, and she went upstairs to the guest room that Priya had already, quietly, started calling Van's room, and she sat on the bed and she looked at the photograph again in better light. She checked the timestamp twice. She looked at the woman's face. She looked at Adrian's hand on the small of the woman's back, the easy proprietary spread of his fingers, the exact way he used to touch Vanessa in public, back when he still remembered to. She was not angry. That was the strange part. She had been angry in bursts for the last 2 weeks. Angry in the shower, angry at red lights, angry at her own reflection in the bathroom mirror when she brushed her teeth. But in this moment, looking at this photograph, she felt only a clean, quiet, almost scientific interest. 9 months, not 14. So he had lied to her, even while he was telling her the truth. He had stood in her kitchen and delivered a confession, and even the confession had been managed. 14 months sounded better than 9, maybe. It sounded less panicked. It let him look to himself in the bathroom mirror like a man who had fallen in love, not a man who had made a woman pregnant and then scrambled. Or maybe the timeline was worse than she knew. Maybe 14 months was when the affair began, and the pregnancy was only 9, which would mean CL had gotten pregnant on purpose, at a specific moment, knowing exactly what leverage it would give her. Either version was ugly. Either version told Vanessa something she had not let herself know before. This was not a love story Adrian had been trapped inside of. This was a deal that had closed. She put the photograph back in her bag. She did not show it to Priya. She did not show it to Delphine. Not yet. She wrote in the notebook on the page after item 8, a new line. Someone is watching him too. Find out who. Find out why. Then she closed the notebook and went downstairs to eat the soup her sister had made. 3 days later, she went to Faro Street. She went on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock because Delphine had taught her, already, the value of unremarkable timing. Faro Street was a short, narrow lane in the older part of the merchant district, the kind of block tourists walked past without noticing. The address on the cardstock led her to a 4-story brick building with a small brass plaque beside the door that said, in a plain sans serif font, Volkov Holdings. No logo, no company description, just the name. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She was wearing a dark green coat she had owned for 6 years and had never once worn to any event Adrian had taken her to, because Adrian had said, when she bought it, that the color was not her best. She was wearing it today on purpose. A doorman inside saw her through the glass before she had even reached for the handle. He opened the door for her without asking her name. That should have told her something. "Ms. Hale," he said. "Second floor. Mr. Volkov is expecting you." She had not given anyone her name. She walked across a quiet marble lobby to a quiet elevator that opened for her without a button press, and she rode up to the second floor, and when the doors slid open, she stepped out into a long, warm-lit hallway that smelled faintly of leather and cedar and nothing else. A woman at a small desk at the end of the hall looked up, smiled, and said, "Right through there, ma'am," and gestured at a heavy wooden door that was already, Vanessa noticed, a quarter of the way open. She pushed it the rest of the way and went in. The room on the other side was not what she had been expecting. She wasn't sure what she had been expecting. Something theatrical, maybe. Velvet curtains, a chessboard, a fireplace the size of a small car. The kind of room people in movies used to suggest power. This room was none of that. It was a clean, square office with tall windows, a large walnut desk bare except for a laptop and a single fountain pen, 2 low chairs in front of the desk, a short bookshelf, and on the wall opposite the windows, A single framed black and white photograph of a hillside she didn't recognize, with a small wooden house on it under snow. The man from the coffee shop was standing at the window with his back to her. "Ms. Hale," he said without turning around. His voice was lower in a room than it had looked in a mirror. "Thank you for coming." "You didn't exactly ask." He turned then. Up close, he was older than she had thought at Verity's, but maybe mid-40s, maybe a little past, with a face that had the specific quality of having been good-looking once in a more conventional way, and then having been through enough that the face had reorganized itself around something else. His eyes were a very pale gray. He was not smiling, but he was not unfriendly either. He was, she realized, the kind of man who did not waste expression. "Please sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." "All right." He didn't sit either. "Did you bring the photograph?" "Who are you?" "Roman Volkov." "That's a name. Who are you?" He considered her for a moment. Then he walked over to one of the low chairs, pulled it out an inch, and gestured at it. And this time she sat, because she realized, with a small flicker of annoyance, that she wanted to hear what he was going to say. He sat across from her, not behind the desk. He sat in the other low chair on her level, hands loose on his knees. He did not cross his legs. He did not lean back. He did not do any of the little establishing gestures powerful men usually did when they wanted you to know you were in the room with a powerful man. He simply sat. "I am a man," he said, "who hears things in this city that other people don't hear. That's vague." "Yes." "On purpose." "Yes." She smiled thinly. "All right, Mr. Volkov, you hear things. What thing did you hear about me?" He looked at her for a long second. "I heard," he said, "that Adrian Vale threw his wife away on a Thursday night and offered her money to go quietly. And I heard that she didn't go quietly. She burned the offer in a fireplace and went home to her sister and looked at law schools until 4 a.m. A small, dry pause. "That's an unusual reaction. Most people either take the money or scream. You did neither." "How do you know what I did in my fireplace?" "I don't. I'm guessing." "That's a hell of a guess. I'm a good guesser." She studied him. "Do you know Adrian?" "We've been in the same room 3 times. He doesn't know me. He knows a version of my name. He doesn't know what it belongs to." "And what does it belong to?" Roman Volkov did not answer that right away. He looked at her in a way that was, she would think later, the first time in her life she had ever been genuinely measured. Not checked out, not sized up, not flattered, but measured, the way a jeweler measures a stone. "Ms. Hale," he said finally, "I'm going to tell you the truth because I suspect you have had enough of the other thing lately. There's a business in this city that is done quietly. It has to do with who gets what, and at what cost and when, and what is allowed to be said about it afterward. The people who do this business don't advertise. They don't give interviews. They don't run for things. Your husband does not know that this business exists because your husband is the kind of man who believes the visible world is the real one. Most men like him believe that. It's why they lose." She did not speak. "I am," he said, "a part of that business." "How big a part?" "Big enough." "That's vague again." "Yes." She took a breath. "Why am I here, Mr. Volkov?" "Because I watched you in a coffee shop for 40 minutes, he said. "And in 40 minutes, you did 3 things I found interesting. You did not look at your phone once. You did not check your appearance in the mirror behind the espresso machine, although you could see it perfectly from where you were sitting. And when the girl from Blackwood was late, you did not get annoyed. You opened a notebook and used the time. Most people waste time they did not plan to have. You didn't. Those are very small things." "Yes," he said. "The small things are the only things that matter. Anyone can be impressive on a good day." She almost smiled. She stopped herself. "The photograph," she said. "A gift. From you. From someone I know. Who is watching Adrian for you? Not for me. For a client. Your husband has been a person of interest to a number of serious people for almost 2 years, Ms. Hale. You didn't know that. He doesn't know that either. The photograph is a small piece of a much larger file. I had the small piece left on your windshield because I thought you deserved to know that the story your husband told you in your kitchen was not the whole story. That's all." "Why would you do that for me?" "Because I don't like waste." "I'm sorry?" He leaned forward, just a little. and for the first time she saw something in his face that was not measurement. It was something harder to name. Recognition, maybe. "Ms. Hale," he said, "you are 36 years old. You have an undergraduate degree in political science from West Haven, which you finished summa cum laude in 3 years while working 2 jobs. You speak conversational French and functional Russian, although you never tell anyone about the Russian. You scored a 168 on an LSAT practice test at 2 in the morning on 3 hours of sleep. For 10 years, you have been married to a man who used the word support and meant ornament. And you have filled that role so convincingly that when he threw you out, he genuinely believed he was throwing out a decoration instead of the most dangerous woman in his life. That is waste. I don't like waste." The room was very quiet. Vanessa heard her own voice when it came, as if from a slight distance. "How do you know about the Russian?" "Your grandmother." "My grandmother has been dead for 11 years. "I know." She stared at him. "Mr. Volkov," she said, "are you threatening me?" "No." "Then what are you doing?" "Offering." "Offering what?" "A door." "What door?" He sat back. His face was calm again. The glimpse of the other thing, whatever it had been, was gone. "You are about to spend 3 years," he said, "working harder than you have ever worked in your life. You are going to apply to a law school that accepts people like you once every few years, if at all. You're going to get in. You're going to be top of your class or close to it because you are going to have nothing else in your life, and you're going to graduate into a job market that does not particularly want a 39-year-old first-year associate, no matter how bright she is. And during those 3 years, your ex-husband, who is going to be your ex-husband, because Delphine Okafor is going to make sure of that, is going to become very slowly a different kind of man. He is going to become the kind of man who forgets you existed. He will marry his girl. He will have his child. He will build his business. He will tell himself a story about you in which you were a sad chapter. He moved on from, and that story will become, to him, the truth. By the time you finish law school, he will barely remember what you look like. Do you understand me? Bas? Yes, she said. Good. Now, I am not a man who sells help. I am a man who invests. I am offering to invest, not money. You don't need money, you're about to discover, because Delphine is going to get you more than enough. Something else. Doors. The kind of doors that open for people who know the right people. Internships, clerkships, the room behind the room, an introduction to a judge here and there that most lawyers don't get until year 7, if ever. Information, when information is useful. And in return, he paused. "Here comes the part," Vanessa said quietly, "where you tell me what you want." "Yes." "Go ahead." "I want nothing." She laughed, once sharp. "Mr. Volkov, please." "I want nothing now. I may want something later. When I do, I will ask you plainly, and you will be free to say no. I am not going to own you, Ms. Hale. I have no interest in owning anyone. The people I work with who tried that model are mostly dead or in federal custody. It is a bad model." "Then why?" "I told you, I don't like waste." "That's not a reason. That's a hobby." For the first time he smiled. A small, reluctant, almost private smile, like a man who had just lost a small bet with himself. "Fair," he said. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, without looking at her, "My mother was a bookkeeper. She worked for 31 years for a man who told her, every Friday, that she was lucky he kept her on. He was a cheap man, and a small man, and a vain man, and he died of a heart attack at 59 at his own Christmas party. And at the funeral, his wife wore a dress my mother had helped her pick out and did not recognize my mother's face. My mother was a better mathematician than he was. She was a better manager than he was. She ran his company for him, and he never knew. He thought he ran it. He thought she was a decoration, too." He looked up at her then. "I grew up watching a brilliant woman make a small man rich," he said. "I have a low tolerance for the pattern. That's all. Take it or don't." The silence in the room stretched. "Why me?" Vanessa said finally. "Plenty of brilliant women get thrown out by small men. Why this one? Why now?" "Because you didn't take the envelope. A lot of women wouldn't. A lot of women tell themselves they wouldn't, he said. Very few actually don't. The ones who don't are worth knowing. She studied him. He was, she realized, not a handsome man exactly, but a deeply arresting one. The kind of face you would not forget even if you never saw it again. She thought, briefly and distantly, that he was probably dangerous to be in a room with, and that the danger was not the obvious kind. The obvious kind she could have handled. She had, after all, just survived a marriage to Adrian Vale. I want to think about it, she said. Of course. How do I reach you? You don't. Not yet. When you're ready, you will go back to Verity's on a Tuesday at 2, and you will sit at the same table, and you will open your notebook, and if I am available, I will come. If I am not, someone I trust will. Don't call this building. Don't write anything down about this conversation. If anyone asks you, and eventually someone will, you came here today to inquire about a real estate investment, and I told you I wasn't taking new clients. Is that clear? Yes. One more thing. She waited. I am not your savior, Ms. Hale. I want to be very clear about that because a certain kind of woman in a certain kind of story at a certain kind of moment starts to believe she has found a rescuer, and then she gives away, in 3 months, everything she was going to build. You don't need rescuing. You are already doing the work. I am offering to take the stairs out of your way. You still have to climb. Understood? Good. He stood. She stood. She didn't offer her hand. He didn't offer his. That too felt deliberate. At the door she stopped. Mr. Volkov. Yes. The photograph. Was that a favor or was it an audition? He did not pretend not to understand the question. Both, he said. She nodded, once, and walked out. In the elevator down, she kept her face perfectly still, because she had learned, already, that the doorman and the woman at the desk were the kind of people who watched faces. It was only when she was back on the sidewalk and had walked 2 blocks and had turned a corner into a small empty alley between a dry cleaner and a shuttered bakery that she allowed herself to lean against the wall and press the heels of her hands into her eyes and breathe. She did not know, standing there in the alley, whether she was going to say yes. She did know, with a clarity that almost embarrassed her, that something in her chest had not felt this alive in a decade. That night she sat in Priya's kitchen with a glass of wine her sister had poured without asking, and Priya said, "You're quiet." "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About whether I am the kind of person who takes a favor from a stranger." Priya looked at her over the rim of her glass. "What stranger?" "A man." "Van." "Not that kind of man. A different kind of man." "That's worse." Vanessa almost laughed. "Maybe." Priya set her glass down. "Tell me something honestly. The thing he's offering you, is it going to hurt anybody who doesn't deserve to be hurt?" Vanessa thought about it for a long moment. "I don't think so," she said. "Are you sure?" "No." "Okay." Priya tapped her glass once, with a fingernail. "Then, here's my advice for what it's worth. If you take the deal, take it with your eyes open. Don't romanticize him. Don't tell yourself he's a good man because he was nice to you in a nice office. Don't tell yourself he's a bad man because you saw a movie once. Look at what he does, not what he says. What he does. Okay. And Van. Yeah. If he ever makes you feel the way Adrian made you feel, small or grateful or afraid to speak, you walk. Even if it costs you, you walk. Promise me." "I promise." "Mean it." "I mean it." Priya nodded. They drank their wine. Outside, the autumn wind picked up and rattled something loose on the porch. Vanessa listened to it for a while. She did not go back to Verity's that week, or the next. She applied to Blackwood and to Ash Ridge and to 2 other schools she didn't particularly want because Delphine had said, never walk into a negotiation with only one option. She studied in the mornings at her sister's kitchen table and in the afternoons at a public library 2 neighborhoods over where nobody knew her face. She ran at dawn along a trail in the park behind Priya's block, 3 miles at first, and then 4, and then 5, because she had read somewhere that a tired body was a quiet mind, and she needed a quiet mind. Delphine served Adrian's lawyers in the 2nd week of November. The papers were, as Delphine had promised, patient. They were also, Vanessa noticed with a small cold pleasure, very specific. Delphine had asked for things Vanessa had not thought to ask for. forensic accounting of certain accounts, disclosure of gifts made to third parties during the marriage, a full list of all employees at Vale Dynamics who had received unusual bonuses in the last 18 months. The last one was Delphine's own touch. When Vanessa had asked her why, Delphine had only said mildly, "Because men like your husband don't sleep with one woman. They sleep with a type. The type tends to cost the company money. Juries don't love that." Adrian's camp responded within 48 hours, and the response, Delphine told Vanessa on the phone, was panicked. "How can you tell?" Vanessa had asked. "Because they counter-offered," Delphine said, "before I asked for anything." Vanessa took her first LSAT for real the last Saturday in November. She scored a 171. She cried in the car afterward for 10 minutes, not because she was sad, but because she was tired, the kind of tired that comes from finally letting yourself admit you have been running. She did not go to Verity's that week either. She went the first Tuesday in December, 2 o'clock. She sat at the same table. She opened her notebook. She ordered a black coffee. The cafe was quieter than it had been in October. The holiday crowd had not arrived yet, and the neighborhood had gone into its grayer, colder rhythm. She wrote for 20 minutes. She did not look at the corner table by the window. At 2:23, a chair pulled out across from her and a man sat down. It was not Roman Volkov. He was younger, maybe 30, and compact, with short dark hair and a face that was pleasant in a way that was clearly practiced. He was wearing a gray wool coat and a thin silver watch, and he smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. "Ms. Hale," he said. He did not offer his name. "Mr. Volkov sends his regrets. He's out of the country." "I didn't ask for him." "I know, you came. That's the message." She set her pen down. "What's yours?" He smiled, just a little. "My name is Maxime. I work for Mr. Volkov. When you need something, you call a number I'm about to give you. And if I am the one who answers, you say to me, 'It's Hale.' And I say, 'Go ahead,' and you tell me what you need. If someone else answers, you hang up and you call again in 10 minutes. Do you understand?" "Yes." "The first thing we would like to do," Maxime said, "is have a conversation about your ex-husband's outside counsel. His name is Harlan Whitcross. He has a gambling problem you may not know about. He has been, for the last 9 months, in debt to people who are, how do I say this, not famous for being patient." Vanessa blinked. "I'm not a criminal, Maxime." No one is asking you to be. I am telling you a fact about a man. Facts about men are neutral. It is what you do with them that is not. Mr. Volkov thought you might like to know this fact. You can do nothing with it. You can tell Delphine Okafor. You can forget I said it. It is your choice entirely." "Why would I tell Delphine?" "Because Delphine would know what to do with the fact that opposing counsel is being paid in part by your ex-husband's company, and that your ex-husband's company's board does not know about that arrangement, and that some of that money is going through a short chain to people who are very interested right now in whether Harlan Whitcross keeps his license. That's all." He slid a small card across the table. "A phone number, no name. Welcome, Ms. Hale," he said, and stood, and was gone before her coffee had cooled another degree. Vanessa sat at the table for a long time. The card sat in front of her, a small, pale rectangle. Outside, a boy in a red hat walked a dog past the window. A bus sighed to a stop at the corner. The barista changed the music to something slower. She picked up the card. She did not put it in her wallet. She put it in the interior pocket of her coat, the one with the button. She buttoned it. She opened her notebook. Under item 8. "Never be the one they underestimate again," she wrote, in the same small, clean hand. Item 9. "Learn the difference between a favor and a hook. Take the favors. Never the hooks." She closed the notebook. She paid for her coffee. She went back out into the cold. And somewhere on the other side of the city, in a corner office he still believed was safe, Adrian Vale was leaning back in his chair and laughing at something Ciel had said about the nursery. And he had no idea, none at all, that the quiet, patient, careful woman he had offered an envelope to in October had just taken her first real step into a room he didn't know existed, and that every step after this one was going to be steadier than the last. Delphine Okafor read the information about Harlan Whitcross the way a chef reads a grocery list. She did not look surprised. She did not look pleased. She wrote 3 things down in the margin of her yellow legal pad, and then she looked up over her reading glasses at Vanessa and said, "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" "Yes." from someone who would prefer not to be in the record. Delphine held her gaze for a long moment. They were in her office on a Tuesday evening in mid-December, the city already dark at 5, a small lamp burning on the corner of the desk because Delphine hated overhead lighting. There was a plate of pistachios between them that neither of them had touched. "Ms. Hale," Delphine said, "I have been doing this for 22 years. There are 3 kinds of gifts a client brings me. The first is the kind I use. The second is the kind I pretend I never saw, because using it would get someone hurt that neither of us wants hurt. The third is the kind that gets me hurt, and those I send back." She tapped the page with one fingernail. "Which is this?" "The first," Vanessa said. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "You're sure because you know, or you're sure because you want to be sure?" Vanessa considered the question honestly. She didn't like how it felt. "I'm sure because the person who gave it to me," she said, "didn't ask for anything in return. Not yet. And I watched his face when he gave it. He was not trying to hook me. He was trying to open a door. And if he asks for something later, then I'll decide later." Delphine took her glasses off. She set them down on the legal pad. She looked, briefly, tired. "I'm going to tell you a thing," she said, "and I am going to tell you once, and then we will not speak of it again, because I would like to keep my license to practice and my pension and my very nice view of the reservoir. Are you listening?" "Yes." "The name Volkov is not a name I enjoy hearing in my office." Vanessa did not react. She had known, on some level, that Delphine would put the pieces together. Delphine put everything together. "I have not heard that name," Delphine said. "In this conversation. I will never hear it. You will never say it in this building. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "Good. Now." Delphine put her glasses back on. "Mr. Whitcross is going to have a very bad spring, not because of you and not because of me. Because of a phone call his firm's managing partner is going to receive from a regulatory body on a matter unrelated to your divorce, which happens, by sheer coincidence, to prompt a general review of his files. That review will turn up the bonus arrangement with Veil Dynamics. Harlan will be off your case by March. The lawyer who replaces him will be younger, more cautious, and very interested in not losing her job on a file that already has a smell. She will settle with us. She will settle for more than Harlan would have offered, and she will settle faster, because by the time she inherits the file, she will already understand that her client is not the kind of man a young lawyer wants to fall on a sword for. Vanessa nodded slowly. "This is the favor you were given, Ms. Hale," Delphine said. "Not information. Time. Whoever gave you that information handed you 8 months. I would like you to understand the size of that gift. I would also like you to understand that it is the last one I want to hear about. Are we clear?" "Yes." "Good. Go home. Study. You have a personal statement to write." Vanessa stood. At the door she stopped. "Delphine." "Thank you." Delphine didn't look up from her legal pad. "Thank me in May," she said, "when you sign the papers. Not before. Winter came in hard that year. Crestmont had a storm at the tail end of January that put 3 inches of ice on the streets and knocked power out for a full day in 2 neighborhoods. Vanessa studied by candlelight at Priya's kitchen table, wrapped in a wool blanket, while Priya's husband grumbled upstairs about the refrigerator thawing. She took the LSAT once more in early February because Delphine had told her, "Always build a margin," and she scored a 174, and she did not cry that time. She just closed the laptop and went for a run. Adrian did not call her, not one once. She had thought in November that eventually he would. A late-night text, a whiskey-emboldened voicemail. "Van, can we talk?" But the calls never came. What came instead, through Delphine, was a steady, slow tightening. Harlan Whitcross was replaced, as predicted, in early March, by a woman named Bethany Corey, who was 31 years old and who looked, in the one photograph Vanessa saw, like she had not slept properly since law school. The first counteroffer under Bethany's name came in at almost double Harlan's last number. Delphine sent it back with a polite note. By the end of March, it was clear that Adrian had stopped fighting over the money. He was fighting, instead, over something smaller and more revealing: the penthouse. He wanted the penthouse. He had told Bethany, who had reluctantly told Delphine, that the penthouse had sentimental value to his family. Delphine had read that line aloud in her office, with her voice perfectly flat, and then she had looked up at Vanessa and said, "Do you want the penthouse, Ms. Hale? I never want to set foot in that building again." "Good. Then we will take it, and we will sell it, and we will give the proceeds to a women's shelter in his name. Without telling him, he will find out when he gets a tax form." Vanessa had laughed out loud, the first real laugh she could remember in months. "Delphine, what? Is that legal?" "Ms. Hale," Delphine said mildly, "you are going to law school in the fall. You will learn that legal is a very specific word, and that it lives in a very specific neighborhood, and that there are many beautiful streets just around the corner from it." Law school acceptances came in April. Blackwood offered her a full scholarship and a place in their accelerated track. Ash Ridge offered her money too. 2 other schools said yes politely, and 1 said no, and she didn't care about any of them. She called Blackwood on a Friday morning from Priya's back porch with her hands in her sleeves against the cold, and she accepted. And when she hung up, she sat on the step and cried for a while quietly. And Priya brought her a cup of coffee without asking and sat beside her and didn't say anything, which was the correct thing to do. The divorce finalized in June on a Thursday, almost exactly 8 months after the Thursday in the kitchen. Delphine had warned her that the final number would look bigger on paper than it would feel. It did. It felt, when she saw it in ink, like a stranger's number, a number that belonged to someone with a different life. The apartment went on the market the following week. The money from the sale did, in fact, go to a women's shelter in Adrian's name. Vanessa never heard anything about it. She assumed correctly that somewhere in an accountant's office a very angry phone call was made, and that it had gone nowhere because angry phone calls from men like Adrian about donations made in their own name to women's shelters did not play well when repeated back to anyone. She started at Blackwood Law in August. She did not see Roman Volkov once, that whole 8 months. Not at Verity's, not on the street, not at any of the small, unremarkable places where a person might see another person by accident. She called the number on Maxime's card 3 times in that period. Once about Harlan, once about a small matter involving a journalist who was sniffing around her apartment change with a curiosity that didn't match any story Vanessa could think of, and once, in April, to ask about a man who had approached Priya at a grocery store and asked a few too many questions about her sister. All 3 times Maxime had answered. All 3 times the problem had quietly resolved itself within 72 hours. The journalist had been reassigned. The man at the grocery store did not come back. Harlan Whitcross's name had disappeared from the stationery of his firm the same week Bethany Curry's had appeared on it. Each time Maxime had ended the call the same way. Noted. Have a good evening, Ms. Hale. No follow-up. No favor requested in return. No mention of Roman Volkov at all. It should have reassured her. In a way it did. In another way, it didn't. She found that she thought about him sometimes at odd hours. Not the way a woman thinks about a man she is falling for, but the way a person thinks about a closed door they haven't yet opened. What was on the other side? What it would cost to knock. Law school was a kind of violence she had not expected. She had been warned. The woman from admissions back at Verity's had practically begged her to understand the hours. But warnings about the thing were not the thing. The first month nearly broke her. She was 37 years old in a classroom full of 23-year-olds who could function on 4 hours of sleep. Her memory, which had always been excellent, had lost a step somewhere in the last decade. She had to read everything twice. The Socratic method, administered by a civil procedure professor named Dr. Ebersol, reduced her to a kind of cold sweat the first time he called her name. She survived it. She survived everything. By November of her first year, she was in the top 10 of her class. By February, she was in the top 3. By May, she was first. She did not tell Priya. She didn't tell Delphine. She didn't tell anyone. She found in that first year that she had become a different kind of woman around information. She hoarded it now, the way her grandmother had hoarded flour during the lean years. She gave it out in small pieces only when it would cost her nothing or buy her something. She started at a summer clerkship at Hardwick, Monroe, and Ness the first week of June. It was, by every measure, a brutal placement. Hardwick, Monroe represented the largest financial houses in Crestmont. Their junior associates averaged 60 billable hours a week. Their summer associates averaged 70. She was the oldest summer clerk on the floor by 9 years. She was also, within 3 weeks, the best one. The partners noticed. One of them, A man named Peter So, who had a reputation for being hard on women, pulled her aside in the hallway the second Thursday in July and said, "Hale, you were married to Adrian Vale." "I was. I played golf with him 6 weeks ago. He didn't mention you." "He wouldn't have." So studied her face. "You want an offer out of this clerkship. I want to be good enough that you can't not give me one." So almost smiled. "Acceptable answer," he said, and walked off. The offer came in August. She accepted it, contingent on graduation. The second year of law school was not easier, but it was different. She had found by then the specific group of people who were going to carry her through: a woman named Siobhan in her property class, a boy named Marcus, who had been an army medic before law school and who did not care about any of the posturing, a quiet Korean-American student named Jae Won, who had the best outlines in the class, and who traded them to her for her torts notes without small talk. She did not try to make more friends than this. 4 was enough. 4 was, she had decided, the right number for a person who was building something. She ran into Roman once in the fall of her second year on a Sunday. She was walking out of a farmer's market on Holloway with a canvas bag of apples and a bunch of eucalyptus she had bought for no reason other than that she had liked the smell. And he was walking in, alone, in a dark coat, and they saw each other at the same time. Neither of them stopped. They simply passed each other on the sidewalk, the way two acquaintances pass on a sidewalk, and as they did, he inclined his head. The same small, unhurried acknowledgement he had given her in the mirror at Verity's 2 years earlier, and she inclined hers back. Nothing more, nothing less. A small private recognition between two people who had each been watching the other, from a distance, do the work. She walked home feeling warm in a way she didn't try to examine. It was in the spring of her second year that everything shifted. She had been at the library until almost midnight, and she came back to her apartment. She had her own place now, a small, quiet one-bedroom in Ridgeview, and there was a package at her door, plain brown paper, her name in the same slanted, economical hand from the windshield note. Inside was a single manila folder. She set it on her kitchen table without opening it, and she made herself a cup of tea, and she washed her face, and she sat down, and then she opened it. There were 3 documents. The first was a photocopy of a birth certificate. C.L. Marsh had given birth, according to the certificate, to a boy named Theodore Vale. The date of birth was listed. The hospital was listed. The father was listed as Adrian Vale. All of that was, in itself, unsurprising. The child had been born almost 2 years ago now, and Vanessa had seen him once, from across a restaurant, when Adrian had been stupid enough to take his new family to a place in the flats where Vanessa's second-year study group occasionally met. She had looked at the baby for exactly 1 second and then looked away. She was not interested in the baby. The baby had not chosen anything. The second document was a photocopy of a different birth certificate. Same boy, same date. Different hospital, different listed father, a name Vanessa did not know, Jonas Arvelo. She read the name twice. The third document was a 1-page printed summary with no letterhead and no signature. It said, in dry factual prose, that Jonas Arvelo was a 34-year-old commodities trader who had dated C.L. Marsh for 2.5 years before her employment began at Vale Dynamics. It said that their relationship had overlapped for a period of approximately 5 months, with the beginning of her affair with Adrian Vale. It said that a private paternity test commissioned, not by Vanessa and not by Roman Volkov, but by a third party, a cousin of Arvelo's apparently, who had suspected for some time, had established at 99.99% probability that the biological father of Theodore Vale was Jonas Arvelo, not Adrian Vale. It said that the results of the paternity test were currently known to exactly 4 people: C.L. Marsh, Jonas Arvelo, Arvelo's cousin, and the laboratory technician who had run the sample. It said, in the final line, Ms. Marsh has been making regular payments to Mr. Arvelo's cousin since March of last year. Vanessa read the page 3 times. Then she sat very still at her kitchen table for a long time. She could hear, faintly, the heater clicking on in the apartment next door. Somewhere down the hall, a couple were arguing about a cat. The apples on her counter smelled sweet. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. She did not feel vindicated. She did not feel triumphant. She felt strangely sad. And the sadness was not for Adrian, who deserved it, and not for C.L., who had made her own choices, and not for herself. It was for the baby. Theodore. Theo, probably. A boy who would, at some point in his life, find out that the man whose last name he carried was not his father, and who would have to make his peace with that. She closed the folder. She did not open it again that night. The next morning she carried it, in a plain envelope, to Delphine's office. Delphine read the 3 documents twice. She did not react the first time. The second time, very slightly, she set down her pen. "Ms. Hale," she said, "I asked you in December of your divorce year not to bring me things like this." "I know. Why are you bringing me this?" "Because this one is not about my divorce. My divorce is over. This is about a man who perjured himself in a sworn financial disclosure, who has built the public narrative of his second marriage on a lie, and who is, right now, on the board of 3 companies that rely on the market's belief in his judgment. I am bringing it to you because you are the only person I trust to tell me what to do with it." Delphine was quiet for a long moment. "You want me to tell you to use it," she said. "I want you to tell me whether using it is right." Delphine leaned back in her chair. She looked at Vanessa the way she had looked at her in December, that first year, measuring, careful, the look of an older woman looking at a younger one and seeing not a student, but a peer in the making. "Here's the line, Ms. Hale," she said. "You do not make this information public through a tabloid. You do not pass it to a journalist. You do not use it to humiliate a child or his mother or a stranger named Arvelo who has done nothing to you. You do one thing. You hold it quietly, in a place that cannot be linked to you, and you wait. Men like your ex-husband build everything on the assumption that they are the smartest person in every room. That assumption fails, eventually. When it fails, he will overreach. When he overreaches, he will come back into the orbit of your life in some way. A lawsuit, a business matter, a personal confrontation, something. And when he does, you will have in your hand the one piece of information he cannot survive. You will not use it gleefully. You will use it once, at the right time, and it will end the conversation. Do you understand me? Yes. Good. Leave the folder with me. I will put it somewhere that does not have your name on it. When the day comes, we will know. Vanessa left the folder. Walking out of the office, she felt for the first time something she had not felt in 2.5 years, a sense of her own weight in the world. Not her husband's weight, not Roman Volkov's weight, hers. That night she sat down at her desk and she did something she had not done in 2 years. She called the number on Maxime's card. He answered on the second ring. "Hale," she said. "Go ahead." "Tell him I'd like to meet." A pause. "For what?" "To say thank you, in person, that's all." Another pause, then, "Tomorrow at 6, Verities." "All right." She hung up. She sat at her desk for a long time. She did not know yet what she was doing. She knew only that something in her, some long-held strand of refusal, had loosened. She had spent 2.5 years keeping Roman Volkov at the length of a phone line. She had told herself it was discipline. It was, in part. It was also, she admitted to herself finally, fear, because she had watched, as a younger woman, her own marriage teach her that the men who came into your life in beautiful rooms were the ones who cost you the most. But Roman had not asked her for anything. Not once. In 2.5 years, he had sent her a photograph on a windshield, had opened doors she hadn't known were locked, and had otherwise stayed exactly where she had put him, which was outside the frame of her life. He had let her build. He had let her fail, when failure was instructive. He had let her be angry, when anger was useful. He had not interrupted once. That was not a hook. She understood that now. That was in its own strange, quiet way, a kind of respect she had never been offered by a man before. The next evening, she arrived at Verities at 5:45. She wore a charcoal suit. She had cut her hair the week before, shorter now, just past her jaw. She did not look like the woman who had sat at this table 2.5 years ago. Roman came in at 6 exactly. He was alone. He crossed the room without looking around, the way men who know a room cross it, and he stopped beside her table and waited. "Please sit down," she said. He sat. They looked at each other for a moment. "You've been busy," he said. "I have." "First in your class?" "Yes." "An offer from Hardwick?" "Yes." "Your ex-husband," he said, "has no idea." "No." He will. Yes. He studied her. Why did you call? To say thank you. You could have said that over the phone. I could have. Silence. I wanted to see your face, she said, when I said it. Why? Because I wanted to know whether I could tell, by looking at you, what it is you actually want from me. My lawyer told me 2.5 years ago that every favor is a hook. For 2.5 years, I've been waiting for the hook. I've been watching. I haven't found one. That unsettles me. He almost smiled. It should. Why? Because most people who think they have found a man without a hook are wrong. And then a year goes by, and they realize they were wrong, and it is usually too late. Am I wrong? No. Then what do you want? He was quiet for a long time. The cafe was half full. A man in the corner was typing quickly on a laptop. 2 women were laughing too loudly at a joke neither of them had told well. I have told you once, he said, that I don't like waste. That was true. That is still true. I will also tell you now, because you have earned a second answer, that there is another reason. I have watched you for 2.5 years, Ms. Hale. I have watched you take the information I sent you and use it carefully. I have watched you decline to use it when using it would have hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I have watched you call my office 3 times in 2.5 years about matters of direct threat to you or to your sister, and not once about anything else. I have watched you not ask for money. I have watched you not ask for favors you did not need. I have watched you become, piece by piece, the kind of woman I did not think existed outside of the movies my mother used to cry at. He paused. That is not a proposal, he said. That is not a flirtation. That is an observation. You asked me what I want. What I want is to know you. That is all. Not to own you, not to use you, not to place you in some elaborate plan. To know you. On whatever terms you set. If those terms are professional only, they are professional only. If they become something else, they become something else, at a pace you control. I am 47 years old, Ms. Hale. I have outgrown most of my hurries. Vanessa sat very still. That, she said finally, is the most careful answer a man has ever given me. Good. It's also a little too careful. He tilted his head. A man who answers that carefully, she said, is either a liar or someone who has learned the price of lying. Which are you? The second. How? I used to be the first. She almost laughed. She looked down at her coffee. She looked back up. All right, Roman, she said. The first time she had used his given name, he noticed. She saw him notice. Here's how this is going to go. I have 1 more year of school. I have a job waiting for me. I have a life I am building with my own hands. I am not going to put that life down to sit at a table with you or at any other table with any other man. But I will come to dinner once a month for the next year, wherever you like, and we will talk. And at the end of that year, we will see what we see. If at any point in that year you try to move faster than I am moving, I will walk, and you will not see me again. If at any point you hand me information I did not ask for and did not want, I will walk. If at any point I find that your careful answer was a liar's answer after all, I will walk. Are we clear? Yes? Do you agree to those terms? Yes. Good. She stood. She picked up her bag. At the door of the cafe, she turned back. Roman. Yes. Thank you, she said. And this time, when she walked out into the cold, she did not feel like a woman who had taken a favor. She felt like a woman who had just set a price and been paid it. The dinners, once a month, turned out to be the strangest and most honest year of Vanessa's adult life. They went to small places, never the kind of restaurant Adrian would have picked. Roman had, it turned out, a specific fondness for old family-run spots that had survived 3 recessions by stubbornness and good bread. A Georgian place on Halstead where the woman at the host stand called him son, a Sicilian restaurant in Whitstable where the waiter brought them whatever was good that night without asking, a small dim, warm Japanese counter on Meridian where you sat on stools and the chef didn't speak during service. Vanessa noticed the first 3 months that no one at any of these places treated Roman with deference. They treated him with the kind of ease you only earn by being a decent tipper for 15 years and not making a production of anything. He never brought flowers. He never tried to pay for a cab she hadn't asked him to call. He never touched her. Not her hand, not her elbow, not her back when she walked ahead of him through a door. The first month she had noticed this with a faint, absurd stab of vanity, and then she had understood it, and then she had been grateful for it. He was, in that first year, the most carefully unmale man she had ever spent time with. Not because he was not a man, but because he had read her terms and taken them seriously. They talked about everything except the obvious things. They talked about the book he had been reading since the summer, a long biography of a Polish economist Vanessa had never heard of. She teased him for being the kind of man who took a full year to finish a book, and he said mildly that he had other work. They talked about her classes. They talked about her sister's husband's slow, stubborn recovery from a knee replacement. They talked about a movie she had seen alone and liked more than she had expected. They did not talk about Adrian. They did not talk about Ciel. They did not talk about the manila folder in Delphine's safe, or about the number on Maxime's card, or about the quiet, careful ways Roman's world and her world had begun to rub up against one another now that she was a third-year summer associate at Hardwick Monroe. He asked her once in the 4th month what she wanted her law practice to look like. Not the firm's idea of it, hers. She had thought about the question for a long moment. "I want," she said, "to be the call you make when the lawyer you already have has told you it's over. I want to be the second opinion that changes the first one. I want, specifically, to represent women who have been told by decent lawyers that they have no case, and to find the case." She paused. "And I want to take, when I'm ready, the kind of case that makes a certain kind of man ruin himself out of sheer disbelief that a woman could still be in the room." Roman had looked at her for a long moment across the small table. "That," he had said, "is going to happen." "I know." "You're not being modest." "No." "Good." They left the restaurant that night and walked 2 blocks through a light October rain before getting into separate cars. And when she got into hers, she realized, with the mild shock of a woman noticing a bruise she had not felt forming, that she had not thought about Adrian Vale in 11 days. She graduated from Blackwood Law in May, first in her class, and the dean asked her to give the class address. And she refused, politely, because she had no interest in being the face of anything yet. She took a 2-week vacation, the first real one of her life, a quiet trip to a coastal town in Portugal where nobody knew her name. And then she came back, and she started at Hardwick, Monroe & Ness on the first Monday in July. They put her on a corporate litigation team. The partner who had pulled her aside in the hallway 2 summers earlier, Peter So, made sure of it. She was, at 39, the oldest first-year associate on the floor. She had been warned that this would matter. It did not. Within a month, she had a reputation for returning red-line drafts at 3 in the morning with notes so clean the senior associates started keeping them as templates. Within 3 months, she was on a pharmaceutical antitrust case that had been running for 9 years. And she had found, in a box of exhibits nobody had reopened since the first partner on the file had retired, a single email chain that reframed the entire damages theory. The case settled 4 months later for twice what the team had been asking. Peter So called her into his office the afternoon of the settlement. "Hale." "Yes." "You know what just happened." "We settled." "No, we did not settle. You settled. I want you to understand that because I need you to understand it before I ask you the next question." "Okay. Do you want to stay at this firm?" She looked at him. Is that an offer to leave or an offer to stay? Peter So, who had been a partner at Hardwick for 14 years and who had, by his own admission, not liked a junior associate in at least 8 of them, did something she had not seen him do before. He smiled. "Clever girl," he said. "Stay or leave. Your choice. If you stay, you're on partner track in 3 years instead of 7. If you leave, I know 4 firms in this city that will kill for you, and I'll make the calls personally. But I need to know now, because there's a client I want to move to your docket, and I'm not moving him to someone who is going to walk in 8 months." "What's the client?" Peter So named a name. Vanessa's face did not move. The client was the largest private bank in the northeastern part of the country. Its chairman was a man named Douglas Lerner. Douglas Lerner sat on 4 other boards. One of those boards was the board of Vale Dynamics. Peter, she said carefully, you know who my ex-husband is? I do. And you want me on the Lerner account? I do. Why? He looked at her levelly. Because, he said, Douglas Lerner is about to ask some very uncomfortable questions about some very uncomfortable numbers he has been looking at on the Vail Dynamics balance sheet for the last 6 months. He is going to need counsel. He is going to need counsel who does not have a personal sentimental attachment to Adrian Vail. He is going to need counsel who is, in fact, specifically unsentimental about Adrian Vail. I have been building this move for 11 months, Hale. Are you in or are you out? Vanessa sat very still. She was not surprised. That was the strange thing. Some part of her had known, since the call from Peter's assistant that morning, that the conversation was going to move in a direction like this. It was the pace of a career she had chosen with her eyes open. And yet, hearing Adrian's name in this room, in this context, as a target, as a problem, as a balance sheet with uncomfortable numbers on it, felt, in her stomach, like standing at the top of a staircase and understanding, for the first time, exactly how far down it went. I'm in, she said. Good. Go home. Sleep. Read this by Monday. He slid a binder across the desk. It was 4 inches thick. She read it over the weekend at her kitchen table, with coffee going cold at her elbow, and by Sunday night she understood 2 things she had not understood when she walked into Peter So's office. The first was that Adrian was in serious trouble, and he did not know it yet. Vail. Dynamics had grown, over the last 4 years, at a rate that did not match its underlying fundamentals. Not wildly, not enough to trigger a regulator on a casual review. Just enough, when a very patient reader spent a very long weekend with the footnotes, to be visible. Revenue had been recognized early on 3 major contracts. A subsidiary that was supposed to be at arm's length had been quietly absorbing losses the parent should have carried. 2 acquisitions had been financed on terms that made sense only if you assumed a specific private loan from a specific offshore lender which was not disclosed anywhere, and which was, Vanessa realized on Sunday afternoon with a small, cold thrill, exactly the kind of loan that stopped being invisible the moment a sophisticated board member started asking. The second thing she understood was that Roman Volkov had known all of this for a long time. She could not prove that. He had not said a word to her about Adrian in 14 months of monthly dinners, but she read the pattern in the binder, said the timing of the subsidiary absorption, the specific language of the loan structure, the identity of the Cypriot intermediary, and she thought about the fact that Roman had told her, at their first meeting, that Adrian had been a person of interest to a number of serious people for almost 2 years, and she understood, the way a person understands the weather turning, that the serious people had been watching this and waiting, and that the waiting was coming to an end, and that she had just been handed by her own firm, on her own merits, the specific seat at the specific table from which the end could be most cleanly executed. She closed the binder at 10 o'clock on Sunday night. She did not call Roman. She did not need to. She understood him, now, well enough to understand that he had not arranged this. He had simply not interfered with it. Peter So had moved her to the Lerner account for his own reasons. Douglas Lerner had started asking his questions for his own reasons. Adrian Vail had cooked the books over 4 years for his own, entirely ordinary reasons. Greed, vanity, a private certainty that he was smarter than the room. None of this had required Roman Volkov. All Roman had done, 2.5 years ago, was stand at a window in a quiet office on Faro Street and tell a woman in a coffee shop that he did not like waste. The rest had been her. The dinners with Roman by then had quietly changed. The deal had been a year. The year was up. They had not renegotiated. Neither of them had mentioned the end of the year at the dinner in May, or the dinner in June, or the dinner in July. They had simply kept going. The dinners had become, without announcement, a part of her life. Not a courtship exactly, not anything with a name, but a regular presence, a standing Tuesday at the end of every month, a phone call during the week now and then about something one of them had read. Once, in June, he had come down with a bad flu, and she had sent Maxime a bag of groceries without signing her name, and Roman had not mentioned it at the next dinner. But the soup she had made him, a lentil soup her grandmother had made for every cold she had ever had as a child, had turned up 3 weeks later on the menu of the Georgian place on Halsted under a different name, and when she had ordered it, the woman at the host stand had caught her eye and smiled a small knowing smile, and Vanessa had understood that Roman had been careful, even with soup. In August, at the dinner where she first told him about the Lerner file, he listened without interrupting. When she had finished, he said only, "Are you asking me something?" "No." "Good." "I want you to understand," she said, "that I'm going to do this on my own." "I know. I am going to do it within the law. I am not going to use the folder in Delphine's office. I am not going to call Maxim. I am going to work a file the way any other lawyer would work it, and I'm going to win it on the merits because the merits are there." "I know. I don't want to have a fight about this later." He looked at her calmly over the small table. "Vanessa, I have never once, in 3 years, asked you to do anything you did not want to do. Why would I start now? Because it's my ex-husband. It is. And he is going to go down very hard. He is. And you have, whether you will admit it or not, wanted him to go down for longer than I have known you." Roman took a slow breath. He looked at his hands for a moment, then he looked up. "Yes," he said evenly, "that is true. I want you to know, because I promised you a year ago that I would not lie to you, that yes, that is true. But I will also say this. If you had decided, 2.5 years ago, to take the envelope and move to a beach town and open a bookstore, I would have left your husband alone. I would have watched him, and I would have kept a file, and I would have done nothing, because without you in the story, he is not interesting to me. He is only a case study. He becomes interesting when a woman I respect has a stake in the outcome. So yes, I have wanted him to fall, but only in relation to you, not before you." She was quiet. "You shouldn't be saying that out loud," she said finally. "Why not?" "Because it's the truest thing you've ever said to me." A small silence. "I know," he said. They did not talk about Adrian again that night. They talked about a small art exhibit she wanted to see. He said he would go with her if she wanted. She said she did. They went, 2 Saturdays later, to a gallery in a converted boiler works in the warehouse district, and they walked through the rooms slowly, not close together, not far apart, and at one point she stood in front of a large charcoal drawing of a woman's hands holding a bowl of water, and she did not cry, but she felt something shift in her chest that was adjacent to crying, and Roman stood a few feet behind her and did not speak until she was ready to move, and when she turned to him she smiled at him, very briefly, in a way she had not smiled at a man in many years. That was the fall. Autumn was discovery, depositions, late nights, the slow assembly of a case. By November, the Lerner inquiry had expanded. 2 more board members had quietly come off the fence. A third, a venture capitalist named Ilse Brandt, who had been a loyal Adrian ally for 6 years, had started forwarding uncomfortable emails to Peter So through a channel Peter So declined to name to Vanessa. By December, the question at Veil Dynamics was no longer whether there would be an internal investigation. The question was who would run it and what the terms of reference would be. Adrian fought it at first, the way Vanessa had expected him to. He gave an interview to a business magazine in which he spoke, smilingly, about a few inquiries from longtime partners and the cost of growth. He hired a crisis communications firm. He made 2 public appearances in a single week at charity events his wife was not at, which was, to people paying attention, its own kind of signal. CL, meanwhile, stopped posting photographs of the baby on social media, and then stopped posting at all. Vanessa, who had not looked at CL's accounts in nearly 2 years, was told about the change by Siobhan, who had never stopped monitoring them, and who reported it at a Sunday brunch with the specific dark satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting. The first deposition was set for the 2nd week of January. Vanessa spent New Year's Eve alone in her apartment with a pot of tea and a stack of exhibits. She had declined 3 invitations. Roman was out of the country, in a place she had not asked him to name. At 11:30, she stood at her window and looked out over the city, and she thought briefly about the woman she had been on another Thursday, in another kitchen, with a knife in her hand and a lemon on a cutting board, and she realized, with a mild, quiet surprise, that she could summon the memory without pain. The grief had worn itself out, somewhere along the way, without asking her permission. What was left was not quite peace. It was closer to altitude. She had simply climbed high enough that the weather down there did not reach her anymore. She drank her tea. She went to bed. She woke up on the 1st of January and she did not make a resolution. The deposition, when it came, was held in a windowless conference room at a neutral law firm on Vestry Street. The deponent was not Adrian. Adrian was not foolish enough to be deposed first. The deponent was his chief financial officer, a man named Gerald Pike, who had been with Vale Dynamics for 11 years, and who was, Vanessa could see within the first 20 minutes, a man who wanted very badly to keep his retirement. She was not lead. She was second chair. The lead attorney was Peter So's right hand, a woman named Irina Donnelly, who had been a prosecutor before she had become a litigator, and who had the kind of voice that never raised. Vanessa had prepared the line of questions about the Cypriot loan. She sat in the second chair in a gray suit she had bought specifically for this, and when Irina nodded at her after the third hour, she opened her notebook and began. "Mr. Pike," she said. "Yes." "You are familiar with Taurus Holdings Limited." Gerald Pike's face did something very small. "I'm aware of the entity," he said. "You're aware of it. You did not, for instance, structure a facility of $41 million through it in the fall of the year before last. I'd need to see documentation." "Of course." She slid 3 pages across the table. "Exhibit 47. Please take a moment." Gerald Pike took a moment. His attorney, a careful, expensive, unlucky man named Winters, leaned over and whispered something to him. Pike did not answer the whisper. He was reading. "Mr. Pike," Vanessa said gently after 30 seconds, "is that your signature on page 3? A pause. "Yes." "Thank you. And the counterparty listed on page 2, Taurus Holdings Limited, domiciled in Nicosia. What relationship does that entity have to Vale Dynamics?" It was an unrelated third-party lender." "Unrelated?" "Yes." "Mr. Pike, are you familiar with a Mr. Yanis Papadakis?" The pause this time was longer. Winters was whispering more urgently now. Pike was not listening. "I am," Pike said. "Mr. Papadakis is the sole beneficial owner of Taurus Holdings Limited, is he not?" I believe so." "And Mr. Papadakis has been, for the last 14 years, the godfather of Mr. Adrian Vale's nephew." "Correct." Winters tried then. He objected. He objected vigorously, to form, to relevance, to the nature of the question, to the record. Irina Donnelly watched him with a small, patient expression, and when he had finished, she simply said, "Let the witness answer." Gerald Pike looked at her. He looked at Winters. He looked for a long moment at the page in front of him. He was not, Vanessa realized, a bad man. He was a tired one. He had been loyal to Adrian Vale for 11 years, and loyalty was a muscle that could only be worked so many times before it tore. "Yes," Gerald Pike said. "He is." It took another 4 hours. By 6 in the evening, the Cypriot loan was on the record as a related party transaction, undisclosed, knowingly misreported. By 7, Gerald Pike had acknowledged, under careful questioning, the existence of the early revenue recognition arrangement on the 3 major contracts. By 8, he had, without being asked directly, volunteered a detail that nobody in the room had known about, a second set of internal financials, maintained parallel to the public books, for the benefit of what Pike called, carefully, the principal's own reference. Irina's pen stopped moving for one long moment when Pike said this. Vanessa's did not. She was writing it down as if she had always known it was coming. They broke at 8:30. In the elevator down, Irina Donnelly said, without looking at her, "Hale." "Yes." "You're going to be the first chair on the Vale deposition. Peter said you would be. Peter's going to change his mind when I tell him what just happened in that room. This is your case now." The doors opened. Irina got out. She did not wait for an answer. The deposition of Adrian Vale himself was set for the 3rd Thursday in February, at 10 in the morning, at the same conference room. The papers had picked up, by then, the outline of the story. Vale Dynamics was, by the end of January, under 3 parallel investigations: an internal audit, a civil inquiry by a state regulator, and the slow, patient accumulation of a federal file that nobody at the firm would yet say aloud. The company's stock had lost 19% in 6 weeks. 2 members of the board had resigned. Ilse Brandt had stopped forwarding emails and had started, instead, quietly taking meetings with Peter So herself. Adrian, through counsel, requested a delay. It was denied. He requested a change of venue. It was denied. He requested that his deposition be taken by Irina Donnelly on the grounds This was written into the brief. Vanessa read it twice to make sure that opposing first chair appears to have a personal conflict arising from the dissolution of a prior marriage. The judge on the scheduling motion was a woman named Harriet Ode, who had been on the bench for 19 years and who had, Vanessa suspected but did not know, received somewhere along the way a piece of information about Harlan Whitcross's old gambling debts that made her allergic to men who used the word personal when they meant inconvenient. Judge Ode denied the motion in a 3-line ruling that concluded, dryly, counsel's qualifications are a matter of record. The court does not find prior marriage to rise to the level of a disqualifying conflict. The deposition shall proceed as scheduled. The night before the deposition, Vanessa did not prepare. She had prepared enough. She cooked a small dinner for herself, pasta with olive oil and garlic and a handful of arugula, and she ate it at her kitchen table, and she went to bed at 9:30, and she slept for the first time in a week without waking up. At 6 in the morning, her phone rang. It was Maxim. Ms. Hale. Maxim, why are you calling me? Courtesy. There is a chance, a small one, that something will be attempted today. What does that mean? It means we have information that a man with a history of indiscretion has been hired by someone not a friend of yours to present himself today outside the building on Vestry Street as a former associate of yours and to make a scene. Photographs would be taken. A story would run in a paper that has been cooperative with your ex-husband for some time. Vanessa sat up in bed. Has it been handled? It has. Maxime, Ms. Hale. Without anyone getting hurt. A pause. Without anyone getting hurt, Ms. Hale. The man has been persuaded that today is a poor day for him to be in that neighborhood. He has accepted that persuasion. He will not be there. Thank you. Mr. Volkov asked me to tell you one thing before you go in. What? He said, and I am repeating exactly, she does not need me today. Tell her only that I know it. Vanessa closed her eyes. Thank you, Maxime. Good luck, Ms. Hale. She got up. She showered. She put on the gray suit, and then, at the last moment, she changed out of it, and she put on a different one, a darker one she had bought in Portugal on her 2-week vacation the summer before, a deep navy that nobody at the firm had seen her in yet. She did her hair. She did not put on the pearl earrings her mother had left her. She put on instead a pair of small gold ones she had bought herself the week she had gotten her LSAT score back. She looked in the mirror for a long time. At 9:30, she walked into the conference room on Vestry Street. Irina was already there. Peter So was there. Douglas Lerner was there, sitting quietly in the corner. Adrian's counsel was there, not Bethany Coury, who had long since been spent, but a new man, silver-haired and patrician, a litigator named Jasper Hinckley, who had once been the general counsel for a president. He nodded at her coolly. She nodded back. At 9:53, Adrian Vale walked into the room. He had not seen her in 3 years and 4 months. He stopped in the doorway when he did. It was a small thing, the stop, a half step, nothing more. But Vanessa saw it, and she saw the thing that moved behind his face, and she understood, with a calm that surprised her, that he had genuinely not known until this moment. He had been told by Jasper Hinckley that first chair on the opposing side was a woman named Hale. He had assumed, of course he had assumed, that it was not her. It couldn't be her. She was somewhere in a beach town, with a bookstore, the way the story he had told himself required. He looked at her across the conference room. She looked back. She did not smile. She did not have to. Mr. Vale, she said evenly, please have a seat. We'll begin in 5 minutes. He sat. His hand, she noticed without looking directly at it, was not entirely steady on the back of the chair. She began at 10 o'clock exactly. Mr. Vale, please state your full name for the record. Adrian James Vale. And your current role at Vale Dynamics. Chief Executive Officer, Founder, Chairman of the Board. For how long have you held each of those positions? He answered. His voice was level. He had been coached well. Jasper Hinckley's people were expensive and good, and for the first hour he did all the things a properly coached opponent did. He paused before answering. He did not volunteer. He asked for clarification when a question was imprecise. He drank water at appropriate intervals. He did not look at Vanessa any more than he could help. She did not rush him. She had learned, from watching Irina Donnelly, that the best questioner in a deposition is the least interesting one. You are not a prosecutor in a movie. You're a patient woman with a long list. You go down the list. You do not perform. You simply refuse, quietly, to leave any item unchecked. By 11:30, she had walked him, piece by careful piece, through the structure of the 3 contracts on which revenue had been recognized early. She did not accuse him of anything. She asked him to agree to things he had already, in sworn filings, agreed to. She asked him to confirm dates that were on documents he had signed. She asked him to identify signatures that were his. By 12:30, she had put the Cypriot loan in front of him. He did hear what Gerald Pike had not. He denied it. He denied knowing about Taurus Holdings. He denied knowing Yanis Papadakis, except as, he said, a friend of the family from many years ago. He denied authorizing the loan facility. He denied, his voice a little tighter now, having ever seen the document, Exhibit 47, that Gerald Pike had identified as bearing a signature that was, allegedly, his. Vanessa let him. She did not challenge him. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Vale," and she moved on. Jasper Hinckley, across the table, went very still at that moment. The particular kind of still a senior litigator becomes when he realizes his witness has been let walk into something, and the opposing counsel did not block the door, and now the door is behind him, and it is closing. Hinckley knew, by the way she said, "Thank you, Mr. Vale." He knew. He had done this job too long not to. They broke for lunch at 1. In the hallway, Peter So fell into step with her. "Hale." "Yes." "He just lied on the record about Taurus." "He did." "You have him." "We have him." "On video." "Yes." "Beautiful." "Thank you, Peter." "One thing." "Yes." "When you come back in after lunch, don't enjoy it." She looked at him. "I won't," she said. "Good. Because if you do, even a little, you'll lose the room. The record is a camera, Vanessa. The camera remembers the wrong face. You want the camera to remember his." She nodded. In the small side room where her team was eating cold sandwiches from a tray, she did not eat. She drank water. She closed her eyes for 10 minutes and breathed the way Priya's yoga teacher had taught her 3 winters ago, which she had then never done until now. When she opened her eyes, Irina Donnelly was looking at her across the table. "You all right?" "Yes." "You look all right." "I am all right." "Okay." That was the last conversation she had before going back into the room. After lunch, she put the Cypriot file in front of Adrian Vale a second time. She did it gently. She said, "Mr. Vale, I would like to return briefly to Exhibit 47. You previously indicated you had not seen this document before today. I would like to show you a second document marked Exhibit 62. Take a moment." Exhibit 62 was an internal email, 3 years old, from Adrian Vale to Gerald Pike. It referenced, by name, both Taurus Holdings and Mr. Papadakis. It used the phrase, "our facility with Yanis." It was copied to no one. It had been produced under subpoena from the backup tapes of an email system Adrian Vale had believed, at the time, was private. She watched his face while he read it. She had, in the last 3 years, watched a great many faces read a great many documents. She had never watched a face do what Adrian's face did in those 10 seconds. It was not shock. He was too smart for shock. It was something quieter and worse. It was the moment a man understands, all at once, that the interior architecture of his life has been built on an assumption, and that the assumption is gone. Everything he had believed about who was watching him and who was not, and what was safe and what was not, reorganized itself inside his head in the space of a single breath. He looked up at her. For the first time that day, he looked at her properly. Not as opposing counsel, not as a problem, as his wife. She did not look away. "Mr. Vale," she said evenly, "do you recognize Exhibit 62? He opened his mouth. He closed it. Jasper Hinckley began to say something. Adrian raised one hand, sus, the smallest gesture, barely half an inch, and Hinckley stopped, which was, Vanessa would later think, the first honest thing Adrian had done all day. "Yes," Adrian said. "Is that your email address in the from field?" "Yes." "Is the body of that email written by you?" A long pause. "Yes." "Thank you, Mr. Vale." She moved on. By 4 in the afternoon, she had walked him through the parallel internal books. By 5, she had walked him through the structure of the acquisitions. By 6, she had put the early recognized revenue back on the table, and this time he did not fight her on any of it. He answered flatly. He drank less water. His voice had, somewhere along the way, lost the specific confident resonance that had made him, at 30, the youngest man ever to ring the opening bell at the Crestmont Exchange, and that had made him, at 39, the kind of billionaire other billionaires quoted at dinners. It was not gone, exactly. It had just thinned. He sounded, at the end of the day, like a man who was tired. At 6:30, Vanessa said, "Mr. Vale, one last line of questions, and then we'll adjourn for the day." "All right. I'd like to ask you about Ms. Sael Marsh." Jasper Hinckley sat up. "Objection? Scope." Irina Donnelly, from the other end of the table, spoke for the first time in 2 hours. "Counsel, Ms. Marsh was an employee of Vale Dynamics during the period of the Taurus facility. Her compensation is in the discovery record. Scope is proper. Please let the witness answer." "It's all right, Jasper," Adrian said. Hinckley looked at him hard. Adrian did not look back. "Mr. Vale," Vanessa said, "in the 2 fiscal years preceding your marriage to Ms. Marsh, she received from Vale Dynamics, in aggregate, approximately $486,000 in salary, bonuses, and other compensation. Is that correct?" "I believe so. At the time of those payments, she was a junior strategist in the Aspen division." "Yes. The average compensation for a junior strategist in the Aspen division during that period was approximately $91,000 per year." "That sounds right. Approximately how many other junior strategists in the Aspen division received nearly 300% of the average compensation during that period?" A pause. "I don't know off the top of my head. The answer, Mr. Vale, is 0. She was the only one." "All right. Who approved those bonuses?" "I did. On what basis?" He did not answer for a long moment. "On the basis of her performance. Her performance as a junior strategist." "Yes." "Mr. Vale, were you, during the period in which you approved those bonuses, in a romantic relationship with Ms. Marsh?" Hinckley again. "Objection, relevance, privacy." Irina. "Let the witness answer." Adrian was quiet for a long time. "Yes," he said. "Did the board of Vale Dynamics know of that relationship at the time you were approving those bonuses?" "No." "Did the compensation committee?" "No." "Did any fiduciary to the corporation, other than yourself?" "No." "Thank you, Mr. Vale. We'll adjourn for the day." She closed her notebook. She stood. She did not look at him. In the elevator down, alone, she held herself upright until the doors closed. Then, very briefly, she allowed herself to lean against the wall, and she closed her eyes, and she breathed, and she did not cry, because she had not cried about Adrian Vale in a long time, and she was not going to start now, in an elevator, in a gray building on Vestry Street, with a security camera in the corner. But her hands shook for almost a minute before they stopped. What happened in the next 11 weeks was, from the outside, the orderly collapse of a public company. From the inside, it had the specific private quality of watching a building come down in slow motion, pieces falling in sequence, the dust rising, the structure underneath revealed at last to have been, all along, smaller than the facade had promised. The deposition of Adrian Vale was sealed, technically. In practice, the substance of it made its way, within 72 hours, into the hands of a reporter at a serious business weekly. Not through Vanessa, and not through Irina, and not through Peter So, and Vanessa was careful to verify, not through Maxime either. It was Ilse Brandt. Ilse had been carrying the weight of what she knew for 9 months, and at a certain point the weight had simply become heavier than her loyalty to a man who had never, she finally admitted to herself, deserved either. The article ran on a Wednesday. By Friday, Vale Dynamics stock had lost another 22%. By the following Monday, the federal file that nobody had yet said aloud was no longer silent. A U.S. attorney's office in the neighboring district opened a formal inquiry. By the end of the month, 2 more board members had resigned. Douglas Lerner's bank had quietly unwound its credit exposure, and a law firm Vanessa had never heard of filed a shareholder derivative suit naming Adrian personally as the lead defendant. He fought. He was not a man who knew how to not fight. He gave a second interview, this one to a friendlier outlet, in which he spoke of coordinated efforts to damage a founder, and he referenced, obliquely, personal history that certain parties are unable to set aside. The interview did him no good. The outlet that ran it lost 2 major advertisers within a week. The phrase personal history was picked up by a late-night comedian who spent 3 minutes on it, and the clip circulated. And by the next morning, Adrian's communications team had advised him, in writing, not to do any more interviews of any kind. Ciel left him in April. Vanessa learned about this the way the rest of the city did, which was through a single paragraph in a gossip column she did not read, but which Siobhan texted her with no commentary. Ciel had moved out of the Harrow Street house with the baby. She had retained counsel. The council's first public statement referenced, in careful, deliberately uninformative language, concerns regarding the best interests of the minor child. Vanessa read the paragraph twice. She did not feel what she had thought, once a long time ago, that she would feel at a moment like this. She felt mostly tired. She thought about the boy, Theo, and she hoped, without bitterness, that Ciel would manage the next years of her life with more grace than she had managed the last few, because the child deserved, at minimum, a mother who could. Vanessa never had to use the folder. She had promised Delphine 3 years earlier that she would hold it until a moment came when Adrian had left her no choice. The moment did not come. By the time Ciel's lawyers were drafting their second filing, the paternity question was already, quietly, being managed by people who were not Vanessa. Arvelo's cousin had stopped receiving payments in March. Arvelo himself had apparently made contact. Whatever happened inside the privacy of that reunion was not Vanessa's to know, and she did not try. She told Delphine in May that the folder could be shredded. Delphine did not shred it. Delphine put it instead in a separate file in a separate safe and said, "Ms. Hale, someday, 20 years from now, some reporter is going to decide to write a book about this period in this city. When that reporter calls, I will shred the folder. Until then, we keep our receipts." Vanessa did not argue. She understood by then the logic of keeping receipts. She saw Adrian once in June. She was coming out of a restaurant in the flats, the same restaurant, as it happened, where he had once taken Ciel and the baby, and he was coming in, alone. He had lost weight. He was not, for the first time since she had known him, impeccably dressed. His collar was rumpled. His shoes needed a polish. He saw her before she saw him. He stopped. She stopped. "Vanessa," she did not answer right away. Behind him, the host of the restaurant was pretending not to have noticed. Behind her, on the sidewalk, a woman with a stroller was waiting politely for them to move. "Adrian? Do you have a minute?" She considered him. A year earlier, she would have said no, coolly, and kept walking, because a year earlier she had still been accumulating the small, private hardnesses a woman accumulates when she is training herself not to flinch. A year earlier, the no would have been armor. Now, standing on a June sidewalk in Cressmont, looking at the man who had stood in her kitchen with an envelope, she realized she did not need the armor anymore. She could afford, in a way she once could not have afforded, 1 minute. "1 minute," she said. He nodded. They stepped to the side under the restaurant awning. The woman with the stroller passed. "I wanted to say something to you," he said. "All right." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked for a long second at a point on the sidewalk behind her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said. It was, she realized with a small, clean pang, the first time she had ever heard him use those 2 words in that order in 10.5 years of marriage. Not "I'm sorry you feel that way." Not "I'm sorry about the situation." Just "I'm sorry." She looked at him. She did not hate him. She had thought, in year 1, that she might never stop hating him. She had learned in year 2 that hatred was expensive and that she had other things to spend her life on. By year 3, the hatred was just gone. There was, in its place, not forgiveness either. Something simpler. The flat, quiet knowledge that this was a man who had done an enormous, stupid, selfish thing, and that he was going to spend the rest of his life understanding it, and that her job was no longer to teach him the lesson. Her job had been to survive him. She had done her job. "Okay, Adrian. That's it? What else would there be? I thought you might want to..." I don't know. I thought you might want to say something. I don't. You don't have anything to say to me. She thought about it. Honestly, she took her time. I have one thing, she said finally. He waited. You didn't lose because I came back. You lost because you built a house on sand, and for 10 years I was the only person in your life who was going to tell you it was sand, and you threw me out. That was the mistake, not the affair. The fact that you were surrounded, for the next 3 years, by people who told you everything you did was brilliant. I used to be the one who told you when it wasn't. I didn't know, at the time, how valuable that was. Neither did you. That's why we're standing here. He was very quiet. You think you would have saved me. No, I think I would have slowed you down. That's different. I don't save people anymore, Adrian. I stopped trying. It turns out the women who are busy saving men don't have a lot of time to build anything of their own. He looked at her for a long moment. You're different. Yes. He searched. Not harder. No, just whole. Is that him? She did not pretend not to understand. No, she said. That's me. He nodded, slowly. He had the good sense, finally, too late, but he had it, not to push. Take care of yourself, Vanessa. I already do. She walked away. She did not look back. She walked 3 blocks before she realized, with a small, absurd surprise, that her heart had not accelerated once during the conversation. Her hands were not shaking. She was not crying. She was just a woman walking home on a warm June evening, and the past was behind her, and there was something tender waiting for her in the present, if she wanted it, and for the first time in a long time, she wanted it. She did not marry Roman that summer, or that fall, or even the year after. They took their time. They took, specifically, the kind of time 2 people take when each of them has been badly hurt by a previous certainty and is not willing to mistake urgency for love again. They lived for a long time in their own apartments. They kept their own routines. She kept her own name professionally, always. When they finally did marry, almost 3 years after the deposition of Adrian Vale, it was in a small civil ceremony at the courthouse on Mill Street, with Priya and her husband and Delphine and Peter So and Maxime and the woman who owned the Georgian place on Halstead, who had insisted on coming. There was no photographer. There was no guest list. Afterward, they went to the Georgian place, and they ate a long, slow lunch, and the woman at the host stand cried once, briefly, during a toast, and Roman pretended not to notice, because he had known, for 30 years, not to draw attention to her when she cried. Vanessa thought about her mother that afternoon. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the 9-year-old girl she had been on the day her mother died. And she thought about the 24-year-old she had been on the day she had met Adrian Vale at a rooftop party at a hotel that no longer existed. And she thought about the 36-year-old she had been on the night she had burned an envelope in a fireplace and walked out into the rain. All of them came to the table that afternoon. All of them sat with her. She did not cry. She did not need to. She just let them be there, and she ate her soup, and she held her husband's hand under the table, and somewhere in the back of her mind, very quietly, the 9-year-old girl put her hand in hers. She opened her own firm with Delphine the year after the wedding. They called it Okafor and Hale. They took, in their first year, 16 cases. 12 of them were cases other firms had turned down, women mostly, who had been told by decent, practiced lawyers that they had no case, and who had been handed Vanessa's name by someone who knew someone. Okafor and Hale won 11 of those 12. The one they lost was the one Delphine had told Vanessa. Honestly, they were going to lose because the client had not told them the truth on the intake form, and they had taken the case anyway because they had liked her and they had learned a lesson they needed to learn. Delphine put the loss certificate in a frame on the wall of the conference room because Delphine was a woman who understood that a firm that forgot its own losses was a firm that would soon have larger ones. Vanessa's career grew. It did not grow in the obvious ways. She did not end up on magazine covers. She did not end up giving keynotes at conferences. She ended up, over the next decade, becoming the specific quiet name that specific quiet people used when they were in trouble. 2 governors called her, in a 12-month span, about family matters they did not want in the papers. A federal appellate judge, nearing retirement, asked her to represent him in an ethics inquiry. She did. She won it, and she never discussed the case again. A young actress she had never met, who had been quietly ruined by a man the industry had protected for 3 decades, was passed her phone number by a mutual friend. The actress called. The actress's settlement was, 6 months later, the largest ever paid out in that jurisdiction on that specific type of claim, and the man in question spent the rest of his professional life trying, unsuccessfully, to figure out why his own lawyers had folded so fast. Roman did not in those years interfere in Vanessa's cases. Not once. He kept, in fact, a careful distance from her professional life, partly because he was Roman, and that was who he was, and partly because he had understood, almost from the beginning, that Vanessa's work was the place where she was most fully herself, and that no act of love was more important than protecting that. He did his own work. He traveled sometimes for reasons he did not always fully explain, although he had gotten, over the years, quite a lot better at explaining most of them. He bought, eventually, the small Sicilian restaurant in Whitstable that had been his favorite for 20 years, not because he wanted to own a restaurant, but because the family who ran it had been going to lose it, and he had decided, without telling anyone, not to let that happen. He and Vanessa ate there every other Friday for the rest of their marriage. They sat in the corner. They did not take reservations. Adrian Vale did not, in the end, go to federal prison. The criminal case was settled after 11 months of negotiation with a deferred prosecution agreement, a large personal fine, a 5-year ban on serving as an officer or director of any public company, and a long series of cooperation requirements that, Peter So explained to Vanessa over coffee one afternoon, were considerably more humiliating to live through than a short sentence would have been. Vale Dynamics, stripped of its founder and 2/3 of its market cap, was acquired 18 months later by a larger competitor and folded into a subsidiary whose name nobody outside the industry remembered. Adrian moved to a smaller house in a smaller neighborhood. He was, by all accounts, not poor. He was just no longer the specific kind of rich that had, for so long, been the center of his identity. He remarried, eventually, a woman Vanessa had never heard of, a quiet widow in her 50s who worked as a curator at a small museum and who, by all accounts, did not care about any of it. Vanessa heard about the marriage from Siobhan, who had never stopped monitoring, and she was briefly, honestly glad. She hoped the widow had steady boundaries. She hoped Adrian had learned at 60 what he had not learned at 40. She suspected, without bitterness, that he probably had not entirely, because men did not often learn at 60 what they had refused to learn at 40, but she hoped he had learned a little. A little was enough sometimes. A little was what most people ever managed. CL, for her part, moved out of the city. She took the boy and a modest settlement, and she went somewhere smaller and quieter. And Vanessa was told, years later, by an old acquaintance from the donor gala circuit, that CL had gotten a job at a design firm and had remarried a school teacher and was, by every outward sign, doing all right. Theo, the boy, had grown up knowing who his biological father was, because CL had, at some point, decided that she would rather tell him than have him find out. He had a relationship with both men. It was complicated. It was, Vanessa thought when she heard, probably the best it was ever going to be, and that was something. This is where most stories like this one end, with the woman triumphant, the villain ruined, the new love enthroned beside her. And most of them stop there because most storytellers understand that the audience has been trained to expect a certain kind of finish, and the finish is a kind of music. But if you are still listening, let me tell you the truth, because the truth is the part that doesn't usually get said out loud. Vanessa did not become happy because Adrian fell. She did not become whole because she married Roman. She did not become powerful because she had information, or contacts, or a quiet husband with a quiet reach. She became those things because, on a Thursday night in October, in a kitchen, with a lemon half sliced on a cutting board and an envelope on a marble counter, she chose, in the smallest and most private way, not to beg. She chose not to weep out loud, not to throw the knife, not to take the money, not to take the lie. She chose instead to go upstairs and pack a bag. She chose the next morning to apply to law school. She chose every single day for the next 10 years to get up and do the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, even on the days when the next thing was boring, or exhausting, or frightening, or when the reward for doing the next thing was simply that she got to do a further next thing after it. That is the part that does not make for a good movie trailer. It is, however, the part that is true. The other part that is true is this. The men who throw women away almost never understand, at the moment of throwing, what they are throwing away. They see a wife, they see an obligation, they see on a good day an asset. They do not see the person. They do not see the years of invisible, unthanked studying that person has been doing in 1,000 small ways they never noticed. They do not see the intelligence that has been politely dimmed at their dinner parties. They do not see the patience that has been absorbing, without complaint, the small cruelties of their worst days. They see a decoration, and they assume, because a decoration has been decorative, that a decoration cannot become anything else. And so when the decoration walks out of the room and shuts the door behind her, and over the course of the next decade, becomes an entire person. A person with a practice, with a name, with a husband who respects her specifically for who she is and not for who he wants her to be. With a quiet, hard-won authority in her own life. The man who threw her away does not understand how it happened. He thinks something was taken from him. He thinks he was robbed. He is unable to see, even with everything laid out in front of him on a sidewalk on a June evening, that he was not robbed. He was simply, finally, given the truth about what he had been living with. Power, Vanessa had said to Roman once, late at night, a long time after all of it. Power is not the thing that announces itself. The men who announce themselves are almost always the ones who are about to lose. Real power is the woman who, at the worst moment of her life, does not make a scene. Real power is the one who goes home and gets very quiet and starts reading. Real power is patient. It takes 10 years. It takes 20. It builds piece by piece in rooms nobody is watching. And by the time anyone realizes it is there, it is already everywhere. That is the end of the story. Not a rescue, not a revenge. A woman walks out of a kitchen on a Thursday night in October, and 10 years later, on a warm afternoon in June, she is whole. She did not become whole because of a man. She did not become whole because of a ruin. She became whole because, every day for 10 years, in ways nobody saw, she chose to. If you have been thrown away by a partner, by a family, by a job, by a city that told you you were too old, too late, too tired to start again, hear this one time from someone who has watched 1,000 versions of this story unfold. The worst night of your life is not the end of your life. It is sometimes, although you cannot feel it yet, the quiet beginning of the life you are actually supposed to have. You will not believe that tonight. You do not have to believe it tonight. You only have to do the next thing. Go upstairs. Pack a bag. Call your sister. Open a notebook. Write item 1. That's all. That's the whole secret. The rest, given enough time, is just work.